Hi, everyone. As our attendees keep coming through and our audience members, welcome to our panel of Being BIPOC Abroad, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. My name is Nina Angeles. I'll be the moderator for today's session. We have some lovely panelists who are going to talk about their experiences of what it was like to be BIPOC abroad in their own programs. So just a quick intro. The experience of being Black, Indigenous, or a person of color abroad can really range from feeling comforting or isolating. And, I think that really depends upon the racial makeup of the host country that a student or researcher might be living in. So the BIPOC experience is certainly not a monolithic one. Depending on how you present yourself, in addition to other physical identities you hold, it may be reassuring to have resources or tools beforehand to keep in mind. So in our session today, I'm really excited for all of you who are in our audience to learn about how our panelists have navigated their identity as BIPOC abroad. So without further ado, I'd love our panelists to introduce themselves. I see Sterling coming in as well, which is great. Perfect timing. Hey there. So Hijret, why don't you kick us off and let the audience know your name, pronouns, the program you participated in, and tell us a bit about what you're doing now.
Thank you, Nina. Hi, guys. My name's Hadred Enuol. I prefer she and hers. And I did my abroad in 2019 with Gilman. And I had the opportunity to go to Germany for that. Currently, I'm trying to get into the compliance law. So it's really interesting stuff. And I worked for an immigration law firm. So praying to get into law school soon. So that's my goal. Yeah. But thank you so much for we represent for making this conference and having me as a panelist. I'm excited for it.
Chris, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Chris, he, him, his. I did an ETA through the Fulbright program in Columbia for the 2018-2019 year. I'm currently a chemistry teacher at a high school in the Bronx. Fun fact, it's the high school where Cardi B went to school. And I'm planning to go to medical school next year to get my MD PhD.
That is a fun fact, Chris. I hope you put that on like Instagram and everywhere.
I definitely share it every time I have to.
That's awesome. Okay, how about you, Sophia?
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Sophia Velazquez, she, her pronouns. I did my Gilman Scholarship in Cusco and Lima, Peru in 2018. And then I got the Critical Language Scholarship for Baku, Azerbaijan for the language of Turkish in 2019. And I am currently a removal defense paralegal. So I am also interested in immigration law and am in the process of applying to law school.
Let's give it up for our immigration law folks here. All right, and Sterling.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Hey, everybody. I'm Sterling, pronouns he, him, his. I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion program manager at SnapMe, the parent company to Snapchat. And in 2012, I did a Gilman to Namibia in Southwestern Africa. And then in 2013, I did a Fulbright ETA in Poland. And also a fun fact, I share a birthday with Cardi B. So it's a lot of energy right here.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had Cardi B playing in the background or something as people were coming in. Well, thank you all my lovely panelists for introducing yourselves. I'm really excited for our audience members to learn a bit more about you. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And again, my name is Nina Angeles. I'll be moderating. I'm also an alumna of the Fulbright program. I did my research in Jordan in 2016 and 2017. So have a little bit of a connection there. But to get us kicked off, I think we agreed as a group, we met, virtually beforehand just to talk through how to, shape this conversation. It's a very important one. The first question that I want to throw out to our panelists is, how did being BIPOC affect how people perceived you in your host countries? And then as a follow-up, did you face discrimination of any kind? So I'll let, the panelists take the lead on this one and mute myself right now.
I'll be that person, I guess, to get us started. So like I said in the beginning, my name's Chris. I did a Fulbright in Colombia. And I think an important preface is that Colombia is a very diverse place. And I use that term very broadly. There are deserts in Colombia, there are jungles, there are mountains with snow, there are plains, and there are people who run the color spectrum from beginning to end. I lived in a town called Leticia, which is at the very southern tip of Colombia, right on the border with Brazil and Peru. And for me, it was a really interesting place to live, particularly as a Black person, because there are people there from all around the world. You had Peruvian people, you had Brazilian people, Colombian people, and then you also had tourists coming in. So it was a really kind of interesting environment where there were people that looked like me, people that didn't look like me. I know that in my personal experience living in Leticia, I didn't experience anything that was particularly, anything that made me feel uncomfortable or any aggression. But I do know that for people who lived in more whiter presenting areas in Colombia, those are real experiences that people encountered. But I will say, I think it's important to recognize that, you know, here living in New York City, I honestly experienced a lot more discrimination just on the subway here than I do, than I ever did in Colombia. And anytime I did have an experience in Colombia that I thought was a little much, I started to really, when I started to think critically about it, I realized that a lot of people really just wanted to know more about me. I had a circle of friends and it never was anything that felt aggressive, but I will say that I did know people that had quite negative experiences. So I'll definitely let others comment if they shared kind of similar.
Yeah, I'm happy to hop in as well. So in my two different experiences, being a Black man, identifying as an African-American man, played a significant role in my day-to-day life and in my experience. The way that people reacted to me was quite different in each of those different cultural climates. There was times where in Poland, not a single person would sit next to me on the bus. I'd be walking around stores and I would hear, you know, certain words that were being, you know, expressed oftentimes in Polish, because a lot of people didn't think that I understood Polish, but I understood enough to know kind of some of the key words to listen out for if I was in a certain environment. So in general, you know, I had those kind of experiences, but I also had some really, really wonderful experiences in Poland as well, where, you know, I was surrounded by people who, you know, really had an appreciation for all of the different cultures that existed at the university that I was teaching at, and really enjoyed having some intercultural dialogue. So overall, it was a wonderful experience. And, you know, to follow that up, or actually preceding that, when I was in Namibia, it was also a very cool you know, time to get to understand a little bit more about my own personal heritage. You know, being brought up in the Midwest in the United States, the feeling of being the majority was not something that I had ever experienced racially outside of, you know, a few isolated circumstances and events. But moving to Africa was really a interesting experience, and it was so full of enjoyment and love and this welcoming spirit from a lot of people, like almost telling me that I was home. And that was something that I had never experienced before and really, really enjoyed. So there were times there, I was interning at an LGBTQIA plus advocacy organization. So there was times where, even though I wasn't an identifying member of the community, I was around people who experienced maltreatment because of, you know, their identity. And in general, you know, there were some times where I felt uncomfortable, you know. So in both experiences, in both places, there was, you know, times that things felt uncomfortable, but there were also very wonderful times having to do with my experience and my identity, particularly around being Black.
I'll go next. So I did my Gilman in 2019 in Germany. 2019, you guys know, that was the Trump administration. So twofold, I had, you know, there was a lot of anti-Americanness around in Europe, especially it was a lot of like political. A lot of people just wanted to talk about politics. And then I also, had to deal with my Asian American identity. And I think it's really interesting because with adults, they'll look at you and they're like, oh, where are you from? And then you say, oh, America. And then like, oh no, where are you really, really from? And I understand that some people are actually just like interested in actually knowing your background and that stuff, but other times you could tell it was more of a like a kind of like a more of a negative tone to it, like it's kind of like saying, oh, because you look different then you're not American. But the kids, because I had the opportunity to work with kids, they just knew that I was American. They didn't ask me where I was from. It was just, oh, an American girl is going to come into the school and talk to you guys about her experiences as an American, and they were like, oh, American. So that was, and then also my friend and I, we travel around a lot. So it wasn't just Germany. We went to like 9 different countries by the end of my study abroad trip. And there were some times where we would be called names like Ching Chong, like 'cause of the eyes, kind of like, and sadly to say, you would expect that more from the rural area, but it was not so much. It was in Munich, which is that was very sad. But either way, and then the anti-Americanness that was a lot. Even kids would ask me, you're American, do you have a gun with you now? It's like, no, I can't bring in a gun, to Germany. And they were just shocked because it was a lot of stereotypes of American that I had to kind of take back and just answer and say, that's not technically true. America is so big. We're such a big melting pot that there's a bunch of people with different experiences and different ethnicities. Everyone's different. Just because Trump is president right now doesn't mean that we're all just racist, homophobic, all of those stereotypes that they would consider with Trumpism. So yeah, Sophia, I think you're the last one to go.
Yeah, so for me, I think just to give everyone a little bit of background, my family is Salvadorian and Mexican. So I come from parents that, are immigrants. And my mom would always tell me, like, me cortaron las alas, pero las tienes tú para que puedas volar lo más lejos que puedas, which is, they cut my wings, but you have yours. So fly as far as you can. So for me, this, receiving the Gilman Scholarship, being first gen, being able to study abroad and travel to a different country for the first time, was something that was very personal, was very meaningful. And I think one of the things that, these study abroad programs don't really talk about is that feeling and those experiences that you carry being first gen and traveling to a country for the very first time, traveling, outside of your own country. So when I got to Peru as a Gilman Scholar in 2018, as you can imagine, I was super excited. I kept documenting everything, just, taking videos, taking pictures, not necessarily of people, but more of like, my peers and the food. And that was also a part of my community service project that I had to do for Gilman, that I was going to record and then go back to my local high school, where it's mostly all first gen students, and pump them up about, studying abroad, and for them to be able to see someone that looks like them just traveling and having those experiences. And I think one of the things, like I said, that these study abroad programs don't talk about, and was a shocker to me, was, right, I'm in Peru, I'm having like such an amazing time taking everything in. And I had a lot of folks that had already had the privilege of traveling to other countries. Oftentimes there were, to put it frankly, white folks who would make my experience very miserable. And they would just be like, why do you keep documenting everything? Like, oh my God, like I've traveled to Paris and I've traveled to Germany and all of these places. Like, you need to chill, because I was so excited. And, little cultural things like, obviously I'm not Peruvian, but I am Latina. And things like getting up and helping someone do the dishes or serving a plate of food, a lot of the times they thought was really offensive, because it's not something that culturally they're used to doing. So they would see me do these things and, experience everything in a different format that they were. And so that became really conflicting, to the point where it was me and another Salvadorian girl actually that just bursted out in tears, and were like, we don't understand like why it's so difficult for you guys to understand that this is our first time being abroad, and this is what we're experiencing. And aside from that, just the whole fact that like we would go to places that were very indigenous, like Machu Picchu. We'd go to these different ruins, and we'd see a lot of the white folks just like mistreat the locals, make fun of their accents, wear their attires and think that it was funny. And so I think that as a person of color, it's a lot to process when you're on these prestigious scholarships and you see people acting out this way. To me, that was probably the most difficult part. And it's still like, I'm still shaking about it, because it was like, it's not something that gets talked about. And I've had so many people that have also been abroad and that are people of color say the same thing. So, yeah.
I just want to say, I think just after listening to the four of you, and even when we first met a couple of days ago, context is very important. I think especially like hearing Chris, you talk about in terms of facing discrimination, feeling it more on a New York subway versus in Leticia when you were living in Colombia, to Sterling, having this sense of, feeling like you're in a home when it was Namibia, is that correct? Versus the time that you were in Poland, where you had said, I think actually you were the second Black Fulbrighter to ever have gone there, and that the first one is still living there. And it's very fascinating to think about these. And I think also, Hadret, with your experience as well, in terms of being identified as, are you American? Are you not American? Like, where are you really, really from? And Sophia, when we think about the abroad process, the questions that we had framed for our conversation together, we had asked about what was it like in terms of the interactions from your host country. But then when you think about, well, you're not just engaging on these programs with people from your host country, you have peers and colleagues too to think about. And so I think context is really important for our audience members, just to, remember that, from person to person on our panel, it really can vary. It can truly, truly vary. So I just want to thank you all, for sharing and kicking us off with that. I'm hoping we can dig a bit deeper into, with the four of you, and if any of you could and would be willing to share surprises and challenges in more detail with us as audience members, and especially for those who are really interested in applying to these programs and want to go abroad.
I can hop in and go first. So surprises. Wow, yeah. I would say that, in the application process, it can be a bit stressful. Like, for example, myself, like I had never heard of a Fulbright before. I had never heard of the Gilman Scholarship, and in so many ways, it was just a completely foreign process to me. But I had an advisor who I really relied on throughout the process, and he really helped me with a lot of the application stuff. And one thing that surprised me was, I thought that it was, when he had first explained it to me, I was like, oh man, I'm not a fit for that. Like, they're not going to want to hear from me. They're not going to want to understand, some of the stuff that I've done or been through. Like, they really just want to hear about the academics. They want to hear about, what it's like, for the average American experience in, this small town where I went to college and things like that. But ultimately, perhaps one of the biggest surprises to me was my advisor encouraged me to share the stories that were most personal, and encouraged me to speak specifically about my identity and about things that made me me, and that made my experience what it was to that point in the United States, and why I was interested in going overseas. So it really surprised me that like I had all of the tools, I had all of the experiences, like that I was valid, that I was important, that my story was, one worthy of being considered. And that was probably my biggest surprise, because to that point, oftentimes there was applications or things in academia I felt like were like, make yourself smaller, or don't talk about being, Black, or what your experience was growing up in, the neighborhood that you did, or whatever it is, So to have been encouraged in that process to use the cultural competency and the confidence that I had being who I was, and that it was enough, was a surprise in the application process. And I'm really happy to have had that experience.
Yeah, I would like to piggy off of Sterling, because imposter syndrome is real. And honestly, I'm very lucky, because before Gilman, I actually got a Erasmus scholarship, which is a pretty big scholarship. Like they pay for your they basically pay for everything for your study abroad at the school. So I was very, very lucky in that sense. So I didn't really understood how just prestigious and the reputation of being a Gilman Scholar is until like I signed up to go to a regional conference in Portugal when I was studying abroad in Germany. And they literally pay everything for you. It's like literally, even your drink, going to the airport, your hotel, everything. And I'm so used to being poor. Some reason I thought we were gonna stay at a hostel or something. So like I did not bring the proper clothes or like the proper shoes. But I think once I finally got there, it was just, you're meeting with a bunch of foreign service officers and diplomats. These are the people that are literally like hosting this conference. And I had a conversation with one diplomat, and I told her, I was just so surprised. And she literally was like, why? She was telling me how proud she was of me. And she was saying, you are here because you deserve it. So, and I think that just made me feel so good about myself. And, I was like, wow, maybe I should start believing in that. So that definitely, the reputation of being a Gilman or Fulbright or Boren or CLL's it goes beyond than, what I can say. Also, my other biggest surprise was I have a kind of identity issue. So I was born in Vietnam, but I'm like a native or like indigenous person. My tribe is Rade. And so when I got to Germany, I had a professor, and he was so interested in Vietnam. It really was. He wanted to learn about the Vietnam War. And, I'm like telling him, my story is going to be very, very different, because the CIA actually used like a lot of indigenous tribes, including mine, on counter operations and all that stuff. And he was just like trying to figure it all out. And then I finally, for my paper, I wrote to him like all the stuff that I knew and what my tribe did. And he's the professor that no one liked. No one liked this dude. They thought he was really tough. In the school that I went, it was like a graduate level class that I'm taking. And at the end of the semester, he wanted to meet with me, and he literally just sat me down and told me like, he said the biggest gift, a student can give a teacher is to teach them something. And that I taught him something that's like he had never heard of it before. He had not knew from this side of the story. And he was just so thankful to meet me. And I had like another professor, an English professor, where she said the same, because I was telling her my Asian identity, Asian, you're ethnic, some guys say yellow fever, ooh, exotic, all that stuff, but then you're like, I don't want to be classified as that. So I think always remember, don't be afraid of your experience and who you are. Like, people are really interested in hearing your story. And so I was really glad to have professors who were actually interested in that, and who actually told me that they were really grateful to have met like an American that they wouldn't think of as like the average American.
Yeah, and I think that going off of that too, like, and I spoke about this yesterday as a panelist for how to write a personal statement. I talked about how oftentimes when we write these personal statements, or when we think we want to, go somewhere or travel abroad, we think like, oh, what are the things that I'll gain from this experience? But oftentimes, like, we end up going to countries where people know very little about our cultures and our identities. And so it becomes like almost like this awesome opportunity for cultural exchange. And for me, like when I went to Baku in 2019, Azerbaijan was a country that I think had it not been for CLS, like I would have never been like, oh, like I want to go to Azerbaijan. But then once I got there, it was literally like the most life-changing experience ever. And I remember my host mom like just running up to me and kissing me and just like hugging me. And she's this little petite woman with like this gorgeous hijab around her head. And she was just like, you're Mexican, right? Like she didn't even like let me explain like what my identity was. She was just like, you're Mexican. And she was like, the movie Coco. And then my host dad would be like, oh, Fernando, like just all these like Hispanic last names, because that's all they had access to knowing about, the Mexican culture. And so for me, like that was one of the biggest surprises, that I was just like, okay, like I understand now that it's not just about me coming to this country, learning the language, learning about the culture. It's also about what they can learn from me and my culture. And so we had nights where we would just like, she would teach me how to make doner, and I would teach her how to make tacos. And I tell her about a little bit of history about, Mexico and El Salvador. And I think that that's like one of the most valuable things that you can do as a scholar when you're abroad, just being willing and open to share about your culture and allow that, to be an opportunity for others to learn about who you are and where you come from as well.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with the imposter syndrome that was shared amongst the panelists. I will say, this is short, the most thing that surprised me most was the amount of experience that a lot of my peers had. In Colombia, we were, I think, about 80-ish 80-ish ETAs and about 10 researchers. And I remember feeling very kind of like, oh, this is Fulbright, XYZ, everyone's gonna be from Harvard and Yale, et cetera. And there were, but there were also, the majority of people were from colleges that I had never heard of. And I went to a state school, so I remember that was like, seeing that mixture of people and that mixture of experiences was really, really fun. I also remember, I thought that everyone was going to have just graduated from college. I thought that that was the target population for people who applied to Fulbright. But I remember I knew people who had been teachers for years and years. There were people who already had PhDs. There was one person who had already done an ETA, but had come back to Columbia to do a research Fulbright. There were people who had been writers before, and then they decided they want to come to Columbia to teach. So I just remember being very, very shocked at seeing the fact that of the a pretty large section of individuals who were there on Fulbright scholarships had not recently graduated from college.
I love hearing, a connected theme here of feeling like an imposter when you go and when you meet, like there are so many surprises, not just from the program, I mean, not just from your country, but from also the program as well. I think, Chris, you touched on a really good point there in terms of, the kinds of people that are applying for a Fulbright or a Gilman or a CLS or a Boren, like it really, really ranges. And touching upon something that Sophia was saying around, a lot of the, purposes of these programs is to really make sure that there is increased exchange and mutual understanding between people across the world. I think as a group, we talked about, at the end of the day, people want to just connect, just seeking connection and recognition. And I think, Sophia, I love the anecdote about your mom, your host mom saying like, oh, like, you're Mexican, Coco, and, because I mean, truly, like in terms of what is exposed about so many different cultures is like really in the media. So like, I love the fact that with these programs, we are able to share and like truthfully and meaningfully share, who we are, because, in terms of being from America, I mean, that narrative, it's at this point, it's like 1,000 different, more than 1,000 millions of stories, you know, in terms of being an American. So thank you all for sharing your surprises and challenges. I want to shift gears a little bit, and we started to touch upon it a bit, Sterling, I think when you brought up more so about the application process. Can you share with our audience members in the next few minutes, what are some tools and resources from your exchange programs that you felt like could have been helpful while going abroad as someone who identifies as BIPOC?
I'm sorry, Nina, do you mind repeating the question one more time?
Yeah, of course. What tools and resources from your exchange programs would have been helpful to you as someone who identifies as BIPOC while being abroad? I just have to say, you're also polite. You just kind of wait for each other to, to speak. So don't be shy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in again. In that, some of the tools and resources that I think I would have found most valuable was more information. Yeah, I guess I would have to say is more things that were culturally relevant to my background. Like, if there was more resources available, you know, for traveling abroad for the first time as an African American man, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's some things very much to the point of what the other panelists were mentioning. Like, anytime you travel internationally, like, a lot of the influence for what people know, and the same is true for here in the United States, is we rely on movies, music, TV, art to kind of tell us a little bit and give us a little bit of a glimpse into other people's cultures. And in general, that does, you know, I think it was Hadret who mentioned it, like, that does come with stereotypes. And, you know, for myself, a resource that would have been, you know, more helpful would have been, you know, here are some of the things that you might hear, or, you know, some of the stereotypes that you're aware of in the United States can travel outside of the United States. So, you know, it might be important for you to take a look at your whole identity, you know, the intersectionality that exists amongst that identity, your family history, your education, you know, all of the different things that make you you may show up to other people differently than what they may feel to you, or how they may show up in your community. So, you know, an example is when I came back to the States, I would talk to folks where I'm from, you know, a lot of times they say, hey, you know, I did this cool little Fulbright program, da, 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 and they were like, oh, okay, cool, that sounds good. You know, what's a Fulbright again? And I say, you know, I would explain the program or whatever. And then there was other times where I would speak to people in professional settings or elsewhere outside of my community. And I would say, oh yeah, I did this little Fulbright thing, da, 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 da. And people's eyes were like, ah, what do you mean? You did a Fulbright? Wow, that's incredible. Da, 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 da. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of information or resources, you know, culturally specific resources that would help people sometimes in understanding what their experience may be like, you know, when they go other places. And then likewise, when you come back to the States, resourcing to help you understand what reentry might feel like, and how you might want to talk about or explain different parts of your experience so that you're giving it an accurate, you know, depiction to people, rather than sometimes just relying on like one bit or another bit that's either highlighted or drawn from a stereotype that wasn't necessarily representative of your experience. So those would have been some resources that I would have sought out. And they're out there. There are books, there's podcasts, there's YouTube videos, there's all different kinds of things about people who've traveled who may or may not be, you know, from your culture. So I would encourage anybody who is going to travel to seek out those resources. And then of course, make the experience your own when you get there.
I think for me, this is probably like the biggest tool that or resource that would have been super helpful before even going abroad. And I think that it should be implemented in the orientation that you have, right, with everyone before, you know, they send you off to your country. At least for CLS, is just having more, like attending a conference like this before studying abroad, listening to more people of color talk about their experiences, maybe implement it in your orientation before you send students out and be like, hey, just FYI, these are the kinds of things that you might experience. Your experience as a first generation Latina might be belittled, and you might feel this certain way because, you know, that's just the reality of it. And obviously, like, I hold the privilege of, yes, I'm Latina, but I also have very white skin. And my experience in Azerbaijan was nothing compared to one of my best friends who is Black and experienced racism in so many different levels. She was not prepared for it. I was not prepared for it. And that's another thing. Like, you know, you as a woman of color, for me, like, I was my best friend's biggest ally. And so talking about what it looks like to be an ally and to experience racism in another country before even sending someone off would have been really helpful. My best friend was literally, the second she arrived to the host country, the second her host parents realized she was Black, they didn't want to take her in. And that's just the reality that comes with being a person of color. And like I said, I hold privilege because I'm not Black and I have lighter skin. And for the most part in Azerbaijan, I was able to go about my life like almost like a local because I look like them, you know. But tools that talk about just in general what you're going to experience, what it's like, hearing someone else's experiences would have been super helpful, because it is pretty intense when you're in the situation and you weren't warned or you didn't have something to look back at.
I'll add a little to what Sophia just shared, and a little bit of what Sterling mentioned as well. I think one thing that would have been helpful for me is having access to a lot of the affinity groups that already existed in the country of Colombia for Fulbright. For example, we had a Teal collective for female identifying scholars. We also had a People of Color collective, POCC, and we also had a queer collective for, we called ourselves Queer Colombia because we were in Colombia. And I think that those are really, really nice support structures and systems that Fulbright Colombia already had in place, but in Colombia. And I think it would have been nicer to have access to those Fulbrighters when I was applying. And I mean, I guess it worked itself out in the end, but thinking back, I think it would have been nice to connect with those individuals. Not only that, but I wish I'd realized that it's really not difficult. I mean, yes, you know, we have these fancy scholarships, but it's super easy to reach out to us. We have Instagram pages and Facebook groups and cell phones. And so I wish that I'd been more forward about getting in contact with people and just reaching out. I was happy to edit. We had a Fulbright Noir panel back in, oh gosh, I forget if that was the summertime or this year has just kind of woven together. But I remember meeting with people and I was so happy to get, you know, emails. Can you read my personal statement? Can you read my statement of grant purpose? And then to hear back from those applicants in January, and now they're semifinalists, and now some of them are even finalists, and they're going to do Fulbright, you know, and that was just a Zoom call that we met over, and then I was editing their essay. So I wish that that was something that I had had in my experience when I was applying back in, you know, May of 2017 or whatever it was.
To add on to it, I would say, you know, I think some schools like do like a Gilman or Fulbright seminar, do go to those because it really is really helpful with the personal statement, with, you know, with your project, all that stuff. Because I really didn't know what a Gilman was to start off, like in the beginning. And I do agree with, you know, as a person of color, I think hearing a lot of other you know, other people who have gone study abroad as a person of color would be really helpful. And basically, I feel like we should have like a conversation about the stereotypes and what you can be expected. Because my friend, she's, you know, she's white. She had gone on to Germany on like a spring break study abroad, and she was telling me how everyone is just basically, you know, very open, very welcoming because they've already gone through the Holocaust, and so, you know, not basically like Nazis are gone. So, that was kind of my mindset. I was like, oh, I should go in there. I'd be fine. And then I go in there and no, there's still some Nazis there, they're definitely, especially the more west you go, the more east you go, you can feel people do look at you weirdly. I'm very lucky in that, my English, it sounds like some days it sounds like a more American, whereas my friend, she's Korean, and so you can definitely tell, if her she was viewed a little bit differently because she's from South Korea. Whereas like being an American itself is such a privilege. I realized that because I got to like basically travel anywhere I want within Europe, and my other friends couldn't. Like if you're gone from India or other places, Thailand too, you have to like get special permission for it. But also another good tool is definitely just like searching for other alumni who have won these programs. So like I was trying to apply for the Soros Fellowship last year, and I found someone, and I just like reached out to them on LinkedIn and messaged them, and they had gotten back to me like that quick, because there are good people, and like there's a lot of people who were in the same boat as you, and they really want to help you get to where they are now. So like honestly, don't be afraid. If you want something, go for it. Like definitely just someone's out there, and there are people willing to help you.
All right, thank you, panelists. So, I think it's pretty clear that, all these programs that we've participated in, could be more well-resourced. And something we talked about as a group is, we're not necessarily wanting to lash upon anyone else, but, knowing that we have access now to, affinity groups, even from what Sophia, it sounds like having just like a debriefing of something could sound like this for a non-white person going into a different country could be helpful. So, but it's really, I think, helpful, and makes me feel like it's very impactful to hear that these resources are starting to come to fruition, particularly like Fulbright Noir, Fulbright Lotus, Fulbright Latinx, these and alumni networks, as Hadret was alluding to. We only have a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get in touch with our questions in the chat and in the Q&A. And so, panelists, I'm just going to have us direct our attention real quick to one of the questions that we just received from Yihan Chu about, this seems very specific to, I think, Hadret, something that you said about your time in Germany. So it sounds like many of the students who come to the university where I work are from very remote areas of the state, definitely those who seek to study abroad. Are very open-minded to diverse experiences. What should students from rural settings know about possible prejudgments about them if they go abroad? So I'll open that to the floor of our panelists here if anyone has a particular insight to that one.
That's kind of a tough question, because I don't want to make any assumptions about, this, like who the person going to study abroad is, because I hate to say it, but how you look and how you portray yourself, people are gonna say things like that's where the prejudice, that's where the stereotype, that's where the racism comes from. And so I feel like if someone from a rural background, you might get a little, I think you definitely have to be more open-minded, whereas, I'm in Charlotte, it's very urban, and very much city-like, so I'm exposed to different diversity all around me, whereas someone from rural, they might not get that. And you might have an accent if you're from the rural, they might not be used to that, or they might just be like, oh, how do you say that? The kids that I was like working with, they knew I'm from North Carolina, and so they loved it when I like would try to talk in a Southern accent. They'd be like, "Hey y'all, how you doing?" And it was just the cutest thing. I never, I didn't. They're kids, so I didn't find it offensive or anything. Just like I think with rural versus urban, it's just like the little gimmicks of here and there. Maybe the accent might be an issue that you might get some questions of like, oh, didn't think Americans talk like that, or something like that. It all in all, it's based on the individual. So I would just say, be open, and be open to talk, and be open to communicate well, and in a way that you come as like diplomatic as you can. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I just want to say too that like all of these study abroad experiences and opportunities, they are in a way to help you, get out of your comfort zone. And so unfortunately, like that does mean that coming from a rural area or a smaller town, like is oftentimes, it can be, and I've seen it be used as an excuse to sometimes discriminate or be racist, because they're like, well, I don't know any better. And a lot of the times I've had people that have told me, like, I had no idea that in Peru they did this ceremony and it was so meaningful to them, even though I thought it was strange, especially where I come from, because I'm from a small town or whatever. And they learn from that experience, and they're able to have a more open mind about it. But I will say that there are people that, for example, when I was in Cusco, I can't remember what small town, like from a southern state she was from, but she freaked out and she like insulted one of the women that was selling cuy, which is a guinea pig. It's a guinea pig on a stick. And that was just like super strange and different to her. So she had a negative experience with that. But ultimately, if you're going abroad, you have to be open to just having a more open mind, being willing and able to listen to others' perspectives. And that's something that before even applying to these scholarships, they talk about, and it's part of their requirements, for you to just at least be open. You don't have to be open already, but try to, have an open mind when, signing up to study abroad.
All right, thank you, panelists. So I see that we are at the 2-minute mark, and I just want to quickly, before we start to wrap up, just make sure that our audience members know that we have a survey link that we're going to share in the chat after our panelists, wrap up and close out for the session today. Please feel free to fill it out. Let us know how the session was, what went well, what didn't go well. Did you learn a lot? Did you not learn anything? I hope you learned a lot, though. I'm pretty sure you did. I learned so much from this group when I first met them, and even just today on this session. But if you fill out the survey, you will have, it translates into just raffle tickets for prizes, like some pretty cool prizes later on after the conference. But with 45 seconds left, so I'm gonna put the survey link here for everyone in the chat. But for my lovely panelists, thank you so much. Can you just say really quickly some advice you would share to future BIPOC students and scholars who want to apply for the programs that you participated in?
Oh, I would just like to say, for your application, put in if you're first gen, put in if you're Black, all of the stuff that makes up who you are. I really used up my first generation, my refugee experience, all that. I went ham. I was like, am I the American dream? I kind of sound like it, or am I totally the opposite of what you think American should be? So that for your application, use everything that you have, and like be authentic to yourself. That's what I would say.
I'll quickly say, pick a country that you actually want to go to. Don't pick a country because the statistics look good. I remember I was stuck between Spain and Colombia, and I thought Spain would be the safer option because it had a higher acceptance rate. But I'm happy in the end that I chose to go to Colombia.
I would say, si se puede, you can do it. Don't let imposter syndrome get in the way. You're a badass, your story is amazing, and it's meant to be heard. So just do it, apply.
I would say trust yourself. Be fully confident in who you are. And if you're not, pretend to. You got this.
Chris, Hadret, Sophia, and Sterling, thank you so, so much. And to our audience members, thank you so, so much for being here with us to learn about all of our panelists' experiences. Don't let anything limit you, as you've heard from everyone here today. And please, as you may, please feel free to fill out the survey throughout the conference sessions that you go to, just to let the team know how great of a job they've done, because they've worked so hard to make this conference possible for you. So thank you all so much. And we look forward to seeing you at other sessions later on today and tomorrow.
Bye, guys. Thank you.